Hi everyone, Dr. Shook here. I hope you're doing well today. What I want to talk to you about today is a very important topic about brain health. And this is really, what does your mood tell us about your brain health? Because this is really important to understand that the way that we feel is related to our neurochemistry. What are our brain chemicals, our neurotransmitters? What's going on there that might be causing us to feel, well, sad and depressed, okay? So there are four primary neurotransmitters, brain chemicals that allow the brain, different parts of the brain to communicate with one another. These are the primary ones. So number one is acetylcholine. Now acetylcholine is important for learning and memory. This is one that you can utilize, especially when someone has, well, let me say this. When someone has Alzheimer's disease, the class of drugs, there are two main medications. One of the medications works by causing your brain to not be able to break down acetylcholine. So acetylcholine stays higher in the brain. Now, the problem is, because you want to have better learning and memory when you have cognitive decline, when you have Alzheimer's. The problem becomes that what the medications do is they block an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, so the acetylcholine levels rise. However, the brain and the body is not. The brain and the body always will compensate. So when you take medications that block its breakdown, the body just makes more of the enzyme, and these drugs eventually don't work. And the analogy I like to use when you're talking about acetylcholine, learning and memory, and especially if someone has cognitive decline like Alzheimer's, mild cognitive impairment, what you're doing by using something like this is, instead of addressing the fire that's burning, that's causing the smoke, you're fanning the smoke away. And it's just covering up the symptoms, right? You're just blowing the smoke away so it doesn't bother you while the fire continues to burn and the problem continues to progress and get worse and worse until there's so much smoke you can't fan it away, right? And then you have even a more severe issue. So acetylcholine is important for learning and memory. Now, serotonin, dopamine, and GABA are the other primary neurotransmitters. Serotonin is responsible for happiness and joy. So let me ask you a question. If I'm sad, should I just maybe take more serotonin, or should I use the most common class of drug, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor? So it basically causes you to have higher serotonin in the brain. Should I do that? Well, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying we need to question, why is this happening? Listen, if you're unhappy and something's happened that's awful, right? That's normal. It is normal to not feel well, to not be happy, to be depressed, to be sad. Those are normal human emotions. But when you're unhappy and you have loss of joy and there's no apparent reason for it, there's no reason that you should feel down like that, then that's where, if you're depressed without a cause, we really want to look at that very closely and say, what's going on here that's impacting the serotonin levels? Because we know, like you've just looked throughout the scientific literature, that when you start looking at depression, you start seeing that almost all of the researchers agree that inflammation plays a significant role in depression. It's a very significant role, especially when in the absence of a reason, like a significant reason that you would attribute and expect someone to normally be sad and depressed, okay? So it's really important to understand that we have to question what we're doing. Why are we doing what we're doing? Are we just fanning the smoke away, or are we putting the fire out? And I'm not saying it's wrong to do both, or either one, but you've got to understand that with the research that we have available to us today, we have to do better than just covering up or fanning the smoke away. Do you understand? We've got to do better, because these have long-term consequences. None of these medications that are available work forever. They create other side effects, some that we're not really sure about, but very, very dangerous to play with brain chemistry. Now, dopamine is associated with pleasure and reward. And then GABA is associated with being calm and more relaxed because GABA slows down the firing of your neurons. Now, what we see today is that because there has been and there still is a huge opioid epidemic going on in the United States, and so many people are dying and overdosing and being hooked on prescription pain medications, that we're seeing GABA is being used in place of pain medications, and it slows down the firing of the nerves and the neurons. It helps to make you more calm and relaxed, but it is not without side effects, and you do build a tolerance to it. You take it, but your body will require more and more and more, and there's a threshold that you hit. You can't go over it because it will create some very nasty side effects. Now, the other thing with GABA is often prescribed. It's often prescribed when someone has peripheral neuropathy, numbness, tingling, burning in their hands and feet, most often caused by diabetic neuropathy. It can be other types of, there are other causes, but definitely the most common is diabetic neuropathy, toxic exposures, chemotherapy. A lot of different things can create damage to the nerves in your hands and your feet, and they'll often prescribe GABA as a way to try to slow down the firing of those nerves so you don't perceive it as much. But it's, glad we have it, but it is definitely not without side effects. We always with all of these issues that can affect these neurochemicals that can affect mood and neurological function, we've got to ask the question, why is this happening? This is not the current, the things that we're talking about here, the approach that I'm going to share with you, that's not what the current medical model does. They just look at you symptomatically and they give you something. And I'm like, there's so much scientific literature that tells us that inflammation is very important, that low thyroid hormone is very important for these issues. So many things that could be looked at and tried to identify the root cause without just covering it up and fanning the smoke away. Let's find the fire. Let's not just fan the smoke away, right? Let's actually make as long of a term difference and change in this person's health as possible for their lifetime, because you address the cause to the best of our ability. So the question you have to ask is, when you're having these symptoms and these problems, why is this happening? Like, why is this happening to you? Because I'll tell you that when we look, we need to look at the spectrum of cognitive decline. Okay, so the spectrum of cognitive decline looks like this. So there's SCI, which is subjective cognitive impairment. You have problems with memory, but no one else can perceive it, and it can't really be detected with testing. But you know that you're slowing down, you can't remember things as well. You know it, you're aware of it. Okay. Then there's MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment. This absolutely can be identified on neuropsychological testing and some questionnaires like the Montreal Cognitive Assessment's a good one. And then there's Alzheimer's. Okay. Now this is the spectrum, and it's important to understand that you don't just start off with Alzheimer's, right? It's a progression that occurs. Now the research has been published. A researcher out of UCLA, Dale Bredesen, has been the first person that has reversed Alzheimer's and cognitive decline in someone, and he's done it he's doing it in thousands of people, and he has trained practitioners. Some practitioners are trained using his protocols that he used to reverse cognitive decline in Alzheimer's with the public. I'm one of those people. I'm a Bredesen qualified practitioner, and what we learned through his research, through the research of a lot of researchers. I mean, it's said, standing on the shoulders of giants. Dr. Bredesen's done that. I'm kind of standing on his shoulders. We have learned a tremendous amount from people, and there's a lot of people that have come together and helped with the understanding of these things I'm going to really simplify here for you. But it's very important to ask the question, why is this occurring? And so you don't just jump in with Alzheimer's. You don't start at that endpoint. Well, what happens is that there's usually start with a subjective cognitive impairment. A lot of signs like this, like neurotransmitter imbalances, those can all be warning signs the brain's not healthy, and it precedes this progression, okay? Or it might be associated with subjective impairment, and then it precedes these. So what was identified, what has been determined is that there are 6 subtypes of Alzheimer's. Now, it's important that we talk about Alzheimer's and that there's 6 subtypes, because if we understand that, then what we can do is we can understand, we can reverse engineer the problem, right? So if we see that there are 6 subtypes, what are they? What are their causes? And then we can look at those causes and help us determine risk for someone that may be, not as far progressed down, or maybe someone that doesn't have any symptoms, that's just trying to prevent cognitive decline. This is really important for people that are known to have an APOE4 variant. It's a genetic variant that's one of the greatest risk factors for Alzheimer's. It is the greatest risk factor. If you have one copy of the APOE4 allele, which is a genetic variant, one copy, then you have a 30% increased lifetime risk of developing Alzheimer's. That's compared to the standard population. If you have 2 copies, if you're called homozygous, then what happens is you have a 50 to 90% increased risk of developing Alzheimer's. It is very high. So the thing is, you got to understand, if you have any of those, or if you're just trying to prevent cognitive decline and you want to optimize your physiology, you've got to look at all these factors that promote these subtypes of Alzheimer's, which we'll talk about in a second. There are 36 drivers that contribute to these subtypes. So here are the subtypes. Type 1 Alzheimer's is inflammatory. Anything that drives an inflammatory response in the body promotes this type of Alzheimer's. Autoimmunity, chronic infections, reactivity to foods, chemical reactivity. Anything that drives an inflammatory process is a major issue. Type 1.5 is glycotoxic. So high blood sugar dysregulation creates major issues for the brain. It is, if you look at the scientific literature, this blood sugar dysregulation is called type 3 diabetes or Alzheimer's. That's what if you look throughout the scientific literature, they're calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. Now that's just one type of Alzheimer's, because there are many different causes. Type 2, the type 2 subtypes, remember we had type 1 inflammatory, type 1.5 glycotoxic, so blood sugar. Type 2, which is actually the third type, is atrophic. Atrophic, meaning you don't have what's needed for the neurons and the nerve cells of the brain to function normally and optimally. Okay, important to understand that. If you're lacking vitamins, minerals, and hormones, you will not function normally. If you have a thyroid problem, thyroid hormone is required for normal neurological function. People that are hypothyroid, people that have autoimmunity, that don't have good thyroid hormone physiology, their brain is at risk for transneural degeneration, for declining brain function. Okay, every single cell in the body requires thyroid hormone to function normally. And there's really a saying. I mean, the most common symptoms with hypothyroidism is brain fog and fatigue. Okay, there's a saying: as metabolism goes, so goes the brain. Okay, so if your energy levels are real low, you're real fatigued, guess what? That's a sign of your cellular energy production capacity. Your cells cannot produce energy optimally, and you are in decline. Your brain is in decline. We know that. Okay, we know that. So thyroid definitely plays a huge role. So those are the first 3 types: type 1, type 1.5, type 2. Now type 3 is actually called toxic. Now it is based off of typically we're talking here about biotoxins. So you get exposed to mold, you have the mold is in your body, it releases biotoxins that drive inflammatory processes. Some people have genotype. Their genotype is such that they have chronic inflammatory responses to the mold. Like other people don't have the genotype, so they get mold exposed, but they don't have a chronic inflammatory response to it. Other people do, and that can be a big problem. So there's toxic, which is actually the type 3. Now mold, Lyme disease, and then chemical exposures, mercury, a lot of different chemicals contribute significantly to type 3. All these things, what they do is they trigger a molecular switch called the, let's see, where can we write it here? Called the APP. Wrote a B. Let's just wipe it off here. P. Okay. That's amyloid amyloid precursor protein. Now, that is a molecular switch that all of these drivers and these subtypes, which I'm describing to you now, what they do is they cause these biochemical changes that trigger the switch and promote beta amyloid plaque formation, neurofibrillary tangle formation, and dendrite neuron retraction. So I tell people, I always use the analogy, with cognitive decline, your nerve cells die, and they do not come back. They don't, because nerve cells don't multiply and divide. They're post-mitotic, meaning they don't go through this division process. So if you think of this as a forest of trees, and the trees are all grown up, and the branches touch one another, that's a healthy brain. Now, as you progress down this pathway, and as these molecular switches are triggered, the trees die. Trees die out, and the forest becomes thin. When the forest is the trees have died to the extent that now none of the trees touch. So they grow up, but none of their branches touch. That is a very bad scenario. If we use that analogy and we think of the brain as the forest as the brain, then when you no longer have that ability to make those branches touch, the nerve cells can't communicate, and you can't send and transmit a signal. This is a major issue, because that's where you really lose, and you have irreversible changes with the brain. Okay, so this is due to this amyloid precursor protein being triggered, being fired. Okay, important to realize that everything that we're doing here, the research has revolved around this amyloid precursor protein. Okay, this is what all these drivers and subtypes have been derived and learned from this. Okay, so first they determined these drivers, these triggers, that first they discovered that this APP protein, or this switch, was a very important part of the puzzle. Then they figured out the things that activated the switch. Then they figured out different groupings of the drivers, and they called them subtypes. Okay, that's what we're going through here. Now, the fourth type of subtype of Alzheimer's, and remember, this is important, because if we understand these drivers, they promote this progression. So you don't have to have Alzheimer's. You don't have to have any problems yet, but if you have these factors are active, if you have these factors and they're ongoing, they're active in your body, then you're going to enter into the spectrum. So we're talking about prevention, but we're also talking about anywhere through the spectrum. Figure out what these are, then you can reverse engineer your strategy. If you're missing something, you need it. We've got to give it to the body. If you've got something that's creating, tripping the switch that's inflammatory, you remove it. There's all these things that we want to reverse engineer the process, but you've got to understand the problem first, so you can specifically come up with a plan to address those issues. Now, subtypes. Type 4 is cerebrovascular disease. So the vessels that supply the brain are atherosclerotic. They're not allowing oxygen. They're not allowing blood through. So you can't get blood to the areas of the brain where it's needed, and that carries oxygen, vitamins, minerals, nutrients. Without the blood, you just can't live. Your brain won't survive, won't function well. Now, type 4 also is considered like hypoxic, so decreased oxygenation to the brain. Decreased oxygen delivery is a huge issue. So sleep apnea, upper airway resistance syndrome, these are all things that need to be evaluated if you have a cognitive issue. Like, those are easy things that, like, even without the stuff we're talking about, go get a sleep study done, figure out what's going on. If you have any type of sleep apnea, it has to be addressed. Okay, you can actually make some very amazing progress and improve the way that you feel if you'll get that type of evaluation. Maybe that alone might make some difference. Okay, so and then the last type, type 5, which is actually the sixth subtype, is related to trauma. So we know that trauma is a major issue. It creates loss of neurons or nerve cells in the brain. It triggers inflammatory processes. It is something that is a major predisposing factor to cognitive decline, right? So all these football players and people that play a lot of sports, they either jar their brain, and it impacts the inside of their skull just from the quick starting and stopping, or maybe they play football and they're direct impact all the time with their head. Those are major issues, and we know that leads to decline and poor brain function. So definitely things we have to think about. The question that we always have to ask ourselves, guys, is one thing: why is this happening? Why is this happening? Now that we have this roadmap that's laid out, we can do some great work and amazing things. We can ask, what's actually happening. And we do that, we want to address the root cause, what's causing it, why is it happening. We don't just want to cover things up with medications that force these levels higher. We don't want to fan the smoke away. What we want to do is we want to address the fire that's burning so there is no smoke. And so the way that we try to do this is we want to address the root cause by taking a 3-step process. We want to detect the problems. So now that we know the problems, we know a lot of the problems. We don't have all the drivers yet. It's expected it will probably be somewhere between 50 to 100 by the time it's said and done. We don't know all the drivers, but we know enough. We know enough that we're reversing cognitive decline and Alzheimer's in people that go through these processes and that implement the changes. It's happening. So detect, remove, repair. So we know the problems. So what we do is we check all these things. So we detect with objective, repeatable laboratory testing. Okay. If without that, you are guessing, and there are too many variables here to get it right. Okay. So detect the problem. Step 2, once you have the data and you understand the problems, remove the problem. So if there's something that's driving inflammation, remove it. If there's something your body is missing, give it, right? Let the body heal, help the body heal. Step 3, repair. Okay, so repair the damage to the best of your ability, right? So if you've have decline and you've lost neurons, hopefully there's an opportunity that the trees are still close enough that there's still some branching and that we can get them to fire more rapidly and actually train the brain so that we can make new connections between the trees, right? The trees can grow in a bit. You won't grow new trees, but as long as they can touch and connect, that's really important to understand. Okay, so if you're dealing with these problems and you would like some help, I work with people around the world, across the United States, and we help them. We do very extensive health histories with them. We do this remotely. I do consulting with people where we take very detailed health histories. We help you get the laboratory testing that you need near you. We take that data, we put together specific plans based on what we find to remove the problems, and then work to repair the damage and optimize neurological and cognitive function. And so if you'd like some help, there's 2 things I want you to consider here. If you have a thyroid problem, if you are autoimmune, you need to go to new.thyroidconsult.com. Okay, go there. Don't worry, we'll be working on cognitive function. But if you have a known hypothyroid, if you're known to be hypothyroid, if you have autoimmunity, go to new.thyroidconsult.com. You can read all about working with me as a distance consulting client. You can also come into the office if you're local, but we work with people in other countries and around the world. So we can work together in that capacity. You go there, you can learn all about working with me. You can learn about the details of how it works, the potential costs. Everything will be covered there for you. Okay. Now, if you have a brain issue, right? If you're concerned, if you have a family history of Alzheimer's, if you have subjective cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment, if you are have a loved one or someone that has any of these issues or Alzheimer's and you're trying to get help for them, right? If you are, if you make the decisions for them and this is something you want, we can still work together. We can work together to investigate, detect these problems, remove them, and repair the damage, right? It's going to take dietary and lifestyle changes for sure. I mean, we know that, some supplementation, utilization, and that's okay. We can do those things. So if you have any of those issues with brain-based, right, or if you're concerned if you have the APOE4 variant, go to new.alzconsult.com. Okay, that's new, ALZ, Alzheimer's for short, consult.com. Again, you don't have to have Alzheimer's. You can be anywhere on the spectrum. You can, be interested in prevention and wanting to get the testing to figure this out. In any event, what you need to do is go to one of these sites and I'll help you. If you have questions, please ask them here. We'll do everything we can to help you. Without working with us, we want you to live a healthy life. This is an epidemic that we have to turn this tide. We have to make a difference. So please, if there's anything that we can do for you, let us know. If you have an opportunity, please do share our videos with other people because we've got to make a difference, guys. We have to do things to try to, change the predictions for our future, to have all these people really that are going to end up losing themselves. I mean, Alzheimer's is a terminal disease. It is a life-ending diagnosis. And we can do something to prevent it. And even people that have it, we can work on and we can try our best to stop it or reverse it. but we've got to do it as early as possible. So I appreciate you hanging out with me today. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please let us know. If you need anything from us, if you want to know more about working with us, go to our websites, check it out, and just reach out to us if we can do anything for you. But I appreciate you so much. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day, and look forward to talking